All these things collude at times to turn me into a big fat liar. 5, my most dishonorable fault of all, though it takes me a long while to get to this point. The moment I have decided that somebody is unforgivable, that person will remain unforgiven for life, all too often cut off forever without fair warning, explanation, or a second chance. It was not an attractive list. It stung me to read it. But when I presented Felipe with this inventory of lamentable character defects, he smiled and said, "Is there anything you would like to now tell me about yourself that I didn't already know?" "Do you still love me?" I asked. "Still," he confirmed. How? Because this is the essential question, isn't it? I mean, once the initial madness of desire has passed, and we are faced with each other as dim-witted mortal fools, how is it that any of us find the ability to love and forgive each other at all, much less daily or enduringly? Felipe didn't answer for a long time, and then he said, "When I used to go down to Brazil to buy gemstones, I would often buy something they call a parcel. A parcel is this random collection of gems that the miner or wholesaler or whoever is bullshitting you puts together. A typical parcel contains maybe 20 or 30 aquamarines at once. Supposedly you could get a better deal that way, buying them in a bunch, but you have to be careful because of course the guy's trying to rip you off. He's trying to unload his bad gemstones by packaging them with a few really good ones. So when I first got started in the jewelry business," Felipe went on, "I used to get in trouble because I'd get too excited about the 1 or 2 perfect aquamarines in the parcel, and I wouldn't pay attention to the junk they threw in there. After I got burned enough times, I finally got wise and learned this. You have to ignore the perfect gemstones. Don't even look at them twice because they're blinding. Put them away and have a careful look at the really bad stones. Look at them and ask yourself honestly, can I work with this? Can I make something out of this? Otherwise, you've just spent a whole lot of money on 1 or 2 gorgeous aquamarines buried inside a big heap of worthless crap." It's the same with relationships, he said. People always fall in love with the most perfect aspects of each other's personalities, and who wouldn't? Anybody can love the most wonderful parts of another person, but that's not the clever trick. The clever trick is, can you accept the flaws? Can you look at your partner's faults honestly and say, I can work around that, I can make something out of that? Because the good stuff is always going to be there, and it's always going to be pretty and sparkly, but it's the crap underneath that can ruin you. I asked him, "Are you saying you think you're clever enough to work around my worthless, junky, crappy bits?" "What I'm trying to say, darling," he said, "is that I've been watching you carefully for a long time, and I believe I can accept the entire parcel." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I meant it with every flaw in my being. "Would you like to know my worst faults now?" Felipe asked. I must admit that I thought to myself, I already know your worst faults, mister. But before I could speak, he relayed the facts quickly, as only a man who is all too familiar with himself can do. "I've always been good at making money," he said, "but I never learned how to save this shit. I drink too much wine, I was overprotective of my children, and I'll probably always be overprotective of you. I'm paranoid, my natural Brazilianness makes me that way, so whenever I misunderstand what's going on around me, I assume the worst. I've lost friends because of this, and I regret it, but that's just the way I am. I can be antisocial and temperamental and defensive. I am a man of routine, which means I'm boring. I have very little patience with idiots." He smiled and tried to leaven up the moment. "Also, I can't look at you without wanting to have sex with you." I can work around that. There is hardly a more gracious gift that we can offer somebody than to accept them fully, to love them almost despite themselves. I say this because listing our flaws so openly to each other was not a cutesy gimmick, but a real effort to reveal the points of darkness contained in our characters. They are no laughing matter, these faults. They can harm, they can undo. My narcissistic neediness left unchecked has every bit as much potential to sabotage a relationship as Felipe's financial daredevilry or his hastiness to assume the worst in moments of uncertainty. If we are at all self-aware, we work hard to keep these more dicey aspects of our natures under control, but they don't go away. To be fully seen by somebody then and loved anyhow, this is a human offering that can border on the miraculous. I'm not suggesting that anyone, I have to tell you a story about that later. It's funny. I'm not suggesting that anyone should learn to tolerate abuse, neglect, disrespect, alcoholism, philandering, or contempt. And I certainly don't think that couples whose marriages have become fetid tombs of sorrow should buck up and just deal with it. As a friend of mine told me in tears after she left her husband, I just didn't know how many more coats of paint I could put on my heart. And who, with any sort of conscience, would reproach her for ditching that misery? There are marriages that simply rot over time, and some of them must end. Leaving a blighted marriage is not necessarily a moral failure then, but sometimes can represent the opposite of quitting, the beginning of renewed hope. So no, when I mention tolerance, I'm not talking about learning how to stomach pure awfulness. What I am talking about is learning how to accommodate your life as generously as possible around a basically decent human being who can sometimes be an unmitigated pain in the ass. In this regard, the marital kitchen can become something like a small linoleum temple, where we are called up to daily practice forgiveness as we ourselves would like to be forgiven. Mundane this may be, yes, devoid of any rock star moments of divine ecstasy, certainly. But maybe such tiny acts of household tolerance are a miracle in some other way, in some quietly measureless way, all the same. And even beyond the flaws, there are just some simple differences between Felipe and me that we will both have to accept. He will never, I promise you, attend a yoga class with me, no matter how many times I may try to convince him that he would absolutely love it. He would absolutely not love it. We will never meditate together on a weekend spiritual retreat. I will never get him to cut back on all the red meat. I will never get him to smooth out his temperament, which burns at sometimes exhausting extremes. He will never take up hobbies with me. I am certain of this. We will not stroll through the farmer's market hand in hand or go on a hike to identify wildflowers. Similarly, there are pleasures in his life that I will never share. We grew up in different decades, in different hemispheres. I sometimes miss his cultural references and jokes by a mile, or I should say by a kilometer. We never raised children together, so Felipe can't reminisce for hours to his partner about what Zoe and Erica were like when they were little kids, as he might have done had he stayed married to their mother for 30 years. Felipe relishes fine wines almost to the point of holy rapture, but any good wine is wasted on me. He loves to speak French. I don't understand French. He would prefer to linger lazily in bed with me all morning, but if I'm not awake and doing something productive by dawn, I begin to twitch with a ferocious Yankee mania. Moreover, Felipe will never have as quiet a life with me as he might want. He's solitary, I'm not. Like a dog, I have pack needs. Like a cat, he prefers a quiet house. As long as he is married to me, his house will never be quiet. And may I add, this is only a partial list. Some of these differences are significant, others not so much, but all of them are inalterable. In the end, it seems to me that forgiveness may be the only realistic antidote we are offered in love to combat the inescapable disappointments of intimacy. We humans come into this world, as the Greeks so beautifully explained, feeling as though we had been sawed in half, desperate to find somebody who will recognize us and repair us and complete us. Desire is the severed umbilicus that is always with us, always bleeding and wanting and longing for flawless union. Forgiveness is the nurse who knows that such immaculate mergers are impossible, but that maybe we can live on together anyhow, if we are polite and kind and careful not to spill too much blood. There are moments when I can almost see the space that separates Felipe from me, and that always will separate us, despite my lifelong yearning to be rendered whole by somebody else's love, despite all my efforts over the years to find somebody who would be perfect for me and who in turn would allow me to become some sort of perfected being. Instead, our dissimilarities and our faults hover between us always like a shadowy wave. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of intimacy herself, balancing right there on that very wave of difference, actually standing